Looks like we're just about at our full registration number, so I'll get us started. My name is Roy Butler. I'm the certification specialist for CSWA, and thank you all for joining us today for our Sustainable Weed Management webinar. We're going to be going through a little moderated discussion today, and our moderator is going to be Ben Mackie from Napa Green. We have some wonderful speakers as well. We've got Jorge Antonio Angeles from University of California Cooperative Extension at Tulare. We've got Will John from John Vineyard Applications Inc. and Jordan Lonborg from Coastal Vineyard Care and Associates. We're going to have a Q&A section, so if you do have questions, feel free to write in your questions in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that throughout the discussion. And if we don't get to your question, there will be time at the end, about 5 or 10 minutes to go through questions at the end as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ben Mackie.
Great. Thank you, Roy. It's great to be here today. I'm, as Roy said, Ben Mackie, the Vineyard Program Director at Napa Green. I have a background in kind of diversified regenerative agriculture and got brought on to Napa Green to launch our new Vineyard program back in 2021 that is focused on climate action, social justice, and regenerative agriculture in the wine industry. And we have worked with our growers over the last 2 years to phase out glyphosate products, and then over the next 2 years, phase out other synthetic herbicides for use in the vineyard. And so we've been having a lot of these conversations around different tools to use, techniques, and ways to support each other through these transitions. And so I really look forward to this conversation today. Jordan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Excited to be here. Jordan Lonborg. Graduated from Cal Poly, kind of cut my teeth in Monterey County. I was working on the San Bernabé Ranch for a large vineyard management company, managing around 5,000 acres of grapes, fully conventional, viticulturalist, PCA towards the end there. Moved on to Talbot Creek Vineyard, which is really pretty polar opposite. Certified organic, we certified biodynamic after a year or two of me being there, and then certified regenerative in about 2019. And left that job after nearly 10 years and just started with Coastal Vineyard Care Associates out of Santa Barbara County. I'm based in Paso Robles. I manage a couple vineyards in town here, and then do a lot of regenerative consulting throughout the state. And yeah, happy to be here.
Will, you want to jump in?
Yeah, my name's Will. I have John Vineyard Applications. I started it in 2003. It began as a pesticide application company, as well as a custom harvesting company. And then I slowly started leasing some ground. I currently lease between 400 and 500 acres, depending on the year, short and long-term lease. And we stopped using herbicides on most properties about 4 or 5 years ago. Just felt the need to get away from them and get to doing something else. And now, yeah, we're getting all the ranches certified organic in the process, and happy about not using herbicides.
And Jorge?
Yes, I'll go next. My name is Jorge Angeles. Most people know me by George. I work with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I am the weed management advisor. So I not only work with, weed management in grapes, but, for most of the crops that we grow here. So most of the perennial crops like almonds and pistachios, but I also work with vegetables and some of the forage crops that we grow here in the Central Valley of California. But for the most part, my program, I'm mainly focused on, finding alternative management practices to control some of the herbicide resistant weeds that we have, especially the ones that have developed resistance to glyphosate, like hairy fleabane and maristel. I do work with some of the great producers here, and one of the topics of conversation all the time is finding alternatives to, glyphosate. So happy to be here, and hopefully we can get a good discussion about that topic.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so just so everyone knows, like today we're mainly focusing on those weeds directly under vine. Obviously, we will be talking about the management of tillage in between the vines and the alleyways, but we're really focused on that kind of spray strip traditionally. And so, just to kick us off, to really ground us in this conversation, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about like why we need to manage those weeds, and why we might not want to use herbicides in that location. And so, be it competition, which is a classic one, or even aesthetics, which is another one which comes up a lot. But I'd love to hear your guys' kind of views on that. Will, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think a lot of the competition for sure is a problem. But for us wine grape growers, it seems like a lot of it is just a change of mindset. The vineyards look a little bit different than herbicided vineyards, and you just have to get used to putting up with a little bit more weed pressure and having a different look in your vineyard. It's not always going to look always perfect, pristine, no weeds, which the wineries that I'm selling fruit to are happier that it doesn't look like that. So we're excited about the change of mindset that seems to be going on in the area. And I don't think the weed, I mean, yeah, they're going to compete for some moisture and a little bit of nutrients, but they don't seem to be detrimental to the vines. It's been 4 or 5 years now, and our canopies are fine, and our weed pressure doesn't seem to be that big of a deal.
Definitely. There's been some recent studies showing that like the rooting depths of weeds versus the rooting depths of grapevines are kind of competing for different resource pools. Is that
Yeah.
what you've seen, George?
Yeah, absolutely. We do some different irrigation scheduling anyway. We irrigate deeper sets or longer, deeper sets, and then we have long dry down periods in our vineyards. Say we irrigate for a 48-hour set, and then we don't irrigate again for 6 weeks. So that irrigation scheduling has helped with our weed control, because we're not, say, irrigating 12 hours a week every week. We're doing longer sets of irrigation, but less frequently. So say May 1st, we irrigate a long set, and then we don't irrigate again until maybe June 15th. So for us, it's helped us with the weed pressure.
And Jordan, as a vineyard management company, how do those conversations go with your clients around kind of how things look or how they compete or what they expect to see?
Yeah. Well, it's a generative philosophy and mindset and practices. The very first conversation I have with every property that I'm involved with is this one about changing your mindset, about what a vineyard should look like. We all have this concept of a vineyard where it's really just grapes, right? And one of the core tenets of regenerative farming is diversity. So I want as many different plants and as many different species within that property as possible. I don't really look at weeds as weeds anymore. I look at them as plants that are telling me something, or they're bringing something to the table. Some don't fit, bindweed is a competitor. Star thistle has its own issues, but I have really shifted the way I look at a vineyard there, and so that's the conversation I have with property owners, and it's are you prepared to kind of change what this place looks like? Are you willing to accept a plant later on in the season if they're not interfering with your canopy or your grapevines, coming at it from a completely different angle, and it's been really, really rewarding in many, many levels.
Okay. Joan, you're breaking up a little bit. So, and Jorge, how have you seen that happen in the field as far as like plant health and soil health goes for addressing those weeds?
Oh, well, I mean, it's definitely interesting. Haven't necessarily evaluated the soil health aspect of it, but it's sort of, similar to what Will said, that there's a perception of, how, vineyards are supposed to, or have traditionally have been told to people how they're supposed to look, clean. But if you're not using herbicides, expect to have a lot more weed pressure. And I think as long as, the weeds are not interrupting with the growth of the vines, it should be fine. Obviously, there are some weeds out there that are a bit more competitive. Uh, they're more of a concern to address earlier on before they overpopulate, some of these areas like field bindweed. Another one that comes to mind that's can be very competitive would be like Johnson grass, and they're all perennial weeds. So even if we were using synthetic herbicides, I think they're difficult to control as they are. We have a more limited toolbox when it comes to controlling some of those weeds. But I think that if we're dealing or we're necessarily talking about just annual weeds in general, I think a lot of the annual weeds that we get are more tolerable than some of the perennial weeds that are a bit more competitive. But that's always something that has to be discussed with the grower. Expect to have more weed pressure and be comfortable with having some weeds on those strips that we're talking about that are underneath the vine.
Great. And Will, just before we move on, I've heard from some other growers that the workers themselves that are doing the work in the vineyard have been kind of inspired by moving away from strip spraying. Have you heard anything back from your kind of crew about this
Yeah, for
transition?
sure. A lot from the applicators, herbicides, let's face it, they're killing something. And, even my guys that apply them are, at first they were hesitant, like, are we sure? Look at the vineyard. It doesn't look so clean, doesn't look so pretty. Now they're happy that we're not using herbicides because we spray a lot of fungicides all year long. And to get away from herbicides is nice because we're typically spraying in a conventional program. Maybe you're spraying a herbicide in November to burn down any weeds that have come up. And then you're spraying another pre-emergent in January or February, and then another contact spray in, this time of year when you have mare's tail or, bindweed starting to poke up. So by not handling all those herbicides, I know my employees are a lot happier.
Yeah, and on that front, like kind of moving on to actual like management, how has your kind of schedule changed? Or like, you just mentioned those two sprays that would kind of take care of the whole season. So how has that kind of mindset shifted as far as like your schedule, your timing, your labor force? How's that kind of adjusted as you made your transition?
Yeah, it is a timing issue. With these tools, you have to be real careful when you use them, how you use them. We went through some learning curves with some of the tools this year where our cover crops got real tall and we mowed them, and our particular mower throws the grass or the cuttings on the berm or close to the berm. And then when we run the Clemens through there or the Clemens tiller, it seemed to pile it all up at the end and not do a good job. So one of our learning curves was we need to run these tools through before we mow. So timing is a big issue, and it does take more passes with these tools as opposed to herbicide. I was figuring conventional herbicide budget was around $200 an acre. I haven't used herbicides for a few years, but I talked to some other growers and they have about a $200 herbicide budget. That includes application and material. So I figured it cost me with these conventional tools around 15 bucks an acre. So I can go through there 10 or 12 times and still be cheaper than a conventional program. I know it's more diesel, more effort, but I'm not purchasing the materials And to me, it just seems like a lot safer for the workers.
Yeah.
We had a question come in regarding price. It says, what do you recommend for lowest price, most effective under vine cultivator?
That's a lot of these are going to be site specific. The cheapest and easiest tool that we have is called a Buzzeretti. It's old technology, say from 1950 or 1960. A lot of people don't even know what it is. It's just kind of a speed tool. It doesn't do a perfect job. There's no hydraulics. There's no moving part. There's no working parts. It's if you bring up the slide that I showed, Roy, you can kind of see the blue piece right there is what a Buzzeretti is, just a piece in the back. So that is a real simple speed tool. And it does all right, but it's not perfect. You can see it doesn't get all the way in between each vine, but it does a decent enough job. You just have to have the right timing. Your weeds have to be small. And it doesn't do it perfect, but it does it good enough. And you can see there's no trash on these berms. If there was trash on the berms, that thing just drags it all to the end. So that is
Well,
going to be the fastest and cheapest tool right there. It's just that the blue piece in the back that you see is a Buzzeretti. You can just put that on a normal toolbar and you can do 20 acres a day with it. A set of Buzzerettis costs, without the toolbar, cost about $800. So it's not a lot of money. And the toolbar, most ranches have a toolbar laying around that they can mount them on.
while we're talking about implements, do you want to talk about anything else that you use in the field? You mentioned a Clemens.
Yeah, we use the Clemens weed knife. It does great. It gets all the way underneath the vine, so it goes in and out of each vine. Does a great job, can handle some bigger weeds. I have found that you do need a little bit of dirt on the berm. You need some sort of a little bit of a berm for the tool to work. So whether you use a throwback disc to create a berm, but you do need some sort of berm. The hang up with the Clemens is it's about a 10 or 12 acre a day tool. So it's a little slower, a little more costly. There's a lot of hydraulics, there's moving parts, a lot more stuff to break. This tool that you see right here, this is a Clemens tiller, and then I mounted the Buzzerettis on the back of it. And it is more of a speed tool, so 25 to 30 acres a day, but it doesn't quite do the best job. So what we do is we run this tool when we can. When we have more time, say we're not mowing or we're not spraying our fungicides, then we'll run the Clemens if we have people freed up, because the Clemens is a slower tool, but this helps keep the ranches clean for the most part. So we run the two in conjunction. I would rather run this tool because it's twice as fast, but we do run both. So we do 1 or 2 Clemens weed knife passes, and then 2 or 3 passes with this tool, and that pretty much gets us through the year. And each ranch is different. Some ranches have more weed pressure. Some ranches have weeds like grasses that don't really bother us, where there's not a lot of mare's tail or fleabane weeds that grow up into the canopy. If there's ranches with mare's tail, then we have to be a little more frequently taking care of them. But if it's just grasses and they're not going to grow up through the canopy and they're not really competing much, then we don't, then it doesn't need to look this clean. We don't quite run as many passes through there.
Great. And just to give people context, Clemens, I'm not endorsing them by any means, but just as a resource, Clemens has an office in Woodland, and they like their big thing is like they have one toolbar and they can put all different types of tools onto it, and they're really willing to work with you with whatever kind of price point or kind of situation you're in, and then you can actually kind of cobble things together as well. And so, they have some finger weeders that are just ground driven. There's no hydraulics in it, all the way up to like full on rotating heads, kind of like the old sunflower style that they're starting to develop that are fully hydraulic. So Napa Green developed a weed management toolkit for folks that were trying to move away from herbicides, and we go through each tool, and it's on our website if you want to look at it. There's also case studies around the cost of management for doing it this way. And it goes through every tool. So we do some field days around like we'll bring out like the Fisher Twister and the Palanque Undervine Weeder and the whole Clemens suite. And so there are a lot to choose from, but unfortunately, a lot of them have to come from Europe, and so they can be quite pricey. But I just wanted to mention Clemens because they're right in Woodland, and Tim Clemens is great to work with. Again,
Yeah, they
not
are
an
great.
endorsement.
Yeah, they are great to work with.
Yeah.
And their product is stout, and you don't have a lot of problems with it. So we run the Clemens. That's what I'm familiar with, and they seem to be a great. Parts are readily available right here in Paso Robles, so that helps. If something breaks, you can have it fixed and up and running in a matter of hours. You're not waiting for weeks on parts or anything like that. So
Great.
for me, Clemens is the one of choice.
Definitely. Yeah, the parts thing is a huge deal during the growing season for sure. Did we lose Jordy?
Yeah, it looks like he fell off and
Okay.
reaching out to
All right.
him.
He had some other tools that when he comes back we'll kind of address.
I found something that I've found that really helps. You can see this in this particular video or slide. The moisture is perfect for underground
I was going to ask
cultivation.
about that.
So
Yeah.
if you're trying to do it, before irrigation, and like I said, we have these long dry down periods. We try to time our irrigation where we're going to be running this 3-4 days after, where the ground is nice and moist. Seems like they do a lot better job.
Definitely.
So timing it around an irrigation 2-3 days after an irrigation is key as well.
Great. And did you just mow this in between? Is that?
Yeah, it's just mowed down like a forage mix.
Yeah, gotcha. Are there any kind of have you worked with any specific implements that work well on rocky soil? I know that's always a question, and
Yeah,
Mary asked
rocky
that.
soil is a challenge. I have a vineyard in Adelaide, and I don't know how many people are familiar with Adelaide, but it's basically a giant limestone rock pile. And the tools out there, we've gone through and picked up the rocks, but they are a lot harder on the equipment. So it's slower, and you're fixing stuff more frequently. Yeah. And in the areas that we know that are super rocky, I'm fortunate on that property because it's all dry farmed, so we're not irrigating it. And there's minimal weed pressure, especially in those rocky areas. The rocks don't, or the weeds don't really like to grow because it's so rocky. So rocks are a problem. We just kind of farm around them, and if we have to treat a little bit of those areas by hand, we treat them by hand.
Gotcha. Like shovel work.
Shovel work, yeah.
Okay.
And like I said, the weeds, if they're not growing up into the canopy, they're really not that big of a problem.
Definitely. Yeah, that's just part of that mindset, having to accept a little rugged beauty.
Yeah.
Are there any other kind of implements that you're kind of looking at, Will, or like things that you're excited to try out, or things you've seen your neighbors try?
This was a tool that I had bought this year, and I was excited to buy it. In the past, I've just had the Clemens and the Clemens weed knife and the Buzzerettis as separate tools. I don't know if you can back that video up to the beginning. I don't know if it shows what is actually the Clemens thing that's on the. If you can stop it, yeah, it's not really the best video, but in front of that Buzzeretti is an actual Clemens tiller. So it has these like finger looking disc blades that tills that ground before the Buzzeretti goes through there. That tool, I love that tool. I just got it this year, and it's been great for us. Doing no herbicide on 400 acres is a lot. And I don't have a lot of employees. I have 2 employees, and we do all the mowing, fungicide work, and undervine cultivation with 2 people on 400 acres. So
Wow.
we are, to me, it's a lot of it is about a speed tool. So I like these tools because we can do 25, 30 acres a day. So for us, it's all about the speed and getting through it efficiently.
definitely. Yeah, I can see why ground speed excites you. Definitely.
Yeah, we're
That's-
running this at 4.5 to 5 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I think the Clemens, you're lucky to get 2.5 at best. The Clemens weed knife. They say you can get it up faster, but I don't see us getting it any faster in our particular applications.
Yeah, great. All right, we just got Jordan back. You want to talk about some implements, Jordan?
Yeah, sorry about all the technical difficulties here. Implements. Yeah, I think context is everything, right? No, there's not going to be a perfect tool out there. You really have to understand your property, its topography. I'm on flat ground on a couple sites, so that Clemens has been effective. There are blocks within the vineyard where the drip has been raised high enough, and I see a lot of vineyards that are going in that are moving in that direction, which is great because it allows for a broad array of implements, different implements. I really like the Fisher Australis mower. It's a undervine mower. It's a rotary mower, which is great. It's good for leaving biomass behind. I don't use flails anymore, so I like to keep some armor on the ground. And I've found that thing, the swing arms are hydraulically powered, so they have enough oomph if you're working on hilly sites. But I think one of my favorite undervine implements of all time is one of the original sunflowers. They don't make them anymore. The heads on those sunflowers, they float on the surface of the soil. You're not really cutting anything. It's more of a tillage. And the blades, they're vertically to an L. So they're out there on the used market. They still make all the parts. But I think that one's hands down my favorite, I think. It's slow, but it does a really good job at knocking down larger weeds. You can kind of wait before you start cultivating. But that's the Fisher Australis right there. They're fairly affordable in the world of vineyard implements. It's about $23,000. But you're also mowing. You get to mow your middles. Which, there's one pass solutions are always great. And then on that Clemens, I have a picture up there. We got a little creative this year. We actually hooked up a ring roller to the back of the Clemens, and that allowed us to, it was another one pass option here. So we were running the knife under the vines, and then I was crimping that mid row, and it worked surprisingly well. So, a lot of us, it's hard to go out and buy brand new implements. So when you look around your yard, you can kind of get creative. And this was really effective. Kind of blew me away.
And so with the undervine mower, are you also cultivating after, or are you just in that situation, are you just letting those?
And those blocks, we are moving to a fully mowed system. So I'm kind of promoting growth under the dripper as well. And that's been really effective. Like I said, we all have this idea that any other plant in that drip row is competing, and I've run quite a few trials over the years, and I think the opposite is happening. I believe that plants growing under drip lines, depending on what they are, again, context is everything, but I believe they actually hold moisture at the soil. They keep soil temps down. and they increase biology. There's some fascinating processes that have been confirmed within the last 5 or 6 years. If anyone's interested, I can't urge you enough to look into rhizophagy. This is like a long suspected interaction between bacteria and plant roots, grapevine roots. Never proven, but within the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, it has been proven. It's being witnessed under microscopy, and once you start understanding what that process is doing in a vineyard setting, I think it will kind of reshape the way you look at all plants that are growing within a vineyard.
Yeah, some resources there is Dr. James White. He's at Rutgers, right? Doing that research.
Yeah,
And then John Kempf's podcast through Advancing Eco Agriculture. If anybody wants to really geek out on some rhizophagy, just giving you some resources there. When you do allow those undervine weeds to grow, like if they are growing under a drip emitter, they're going to grow up into the canopy or at least cordon level. Possibly, is that an issue at harvest time, or is that an issue for efficacy of your sprays, like your mildew sprays or anything?
Well, it really just depends on what's there. If it's a winter annual, you're definitely not going to have any issues. If that winter annual has kind of taken over a bed under the drip line, you're going to be milking down mass, which will kind of restrict the other plants from kind of popping up. But again, it's just this field level assessment of what's coming up. If it's a plant that's gonna not reach that drip line or not reach that cordon, I'm not really worried about it. It's it's a very kind of intricate property by property decision. There's no blanket statement there. If they are mustards, that's going to be something we want to deal with on the earlier side, because the more you water, the bigger they'll get. I'm also, fascinated. I'm talking with some growers in Australia, another research project in Washington State. They've started hydro seeding under drip lines, so planting summer perennials to basically promote just these low profile plants that will never reach that drip line, but will, outcompete the smaller rooted plants. There's a couple properties in town here that have had really good success with that. So to me, I think that's a fascinating approach, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the big goal. Like we're talking about, removing herbicides, but then replacing with tillage or mowing. But if we can remove both, I mean that's the self-managing vineyard there. We did have a question earlier about managing weeds in young vineyards and how that change or how that approach differs from an established vineyard. Do you or Will have some insights
Yeah.
there?
No doubt. That's a
Oh,
whole different ball game.
especially around rodents. Just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, without a doubt. The newly planted vineyard it's a completely different approach. I think, yeah, you have to keep things clean. You have much smaller root systems, right? So there will be a level of competition there. Controlling rodents, doing whatever you can to make sure those vines get into year 3 or 4. Absolutely.
Yeah, for those young vineyards, it seems like it's not all done mechanical. You have to spend a little time with the crew and a hoe to keep them clean for sure.
Yeah, have you had much like rodent pressure, Will, in your vineyards?
Not so much rodent pressure, more it's just the nasty weeds like the mustard and the mare's tail that are going to compete when you are irrigating those young vineyards. So not really rodent issues where I'm at. They were existing vineyards and we tore them out and redeveloped them, so the pressure wasn't terrible. But mainly just the weed pressure, and it is 1 or 2 passes with a hoeing crew per year to keep them halfway at bay, even with the Clemens tools that we have. But yeah,
Yeah.
weed pressure.
Sorry, Will. I've learned hard lessons. I think all of this experience, everything comes from mistakes that I've made over the
Yeah,
last
that's right.
18 years, right? Like I didn't come to any of these conclusions without a serious F up, and in that, to that point, like with those young vines, we had a vole breakout, and we were trying to keep biomass high in the mid rows. We were trying to mow in between the vines, thinking we were doing everything right, and it was such a sudden occurrence where it was like one day we noticed one vine that was dying, and within 2 weeks, I'd say easily 40% of that vineyard was gone, because those voles, their life cycle, it's incredible how quickly those populations can grow. It's exponential, and they can just decimate a young vineyard. So that was a really hard lesson. So yeah, and on those young vines, I keep things a little bit cleaner than I would on anything established.
And George, are there like specific weeds that you've seen of concern in vineyards for, especially young vines, or we also had a question about specifically Bermuda grass, which is one of the weeds I respect most, and ways to address some of those weeds without herbicides.
Yeah, and a lot of those more problematic weeds would be like your perennial weeds, especially like the ones I mentioned that are very competitive. Like the field bindweed is one of the ones that comes to mind. Johnson grass. Uh, there's areas where we're getting some other perennials like silverleaf nightshade. It's another perennial. Yellow nutsedge earlier on, especially in early vine establishment, the first couple of years can be very competitive, and it's more or less because it becomes an open invitation for all these rodents that you guys were discussing earlier. And we've seen a lot of areas where we don't keep the weeds under control earlier on, and we see a bunch of these vertebrate pests start getting introduced into these vineyards, and it becomes a mess to try to control them afterwards. So trying to prevent some of those pests from happening in the first place, I think it's very important. But some of the other weeds that were mentioned, like the maris tail and the hairy fleabane, are very, very problematic, especially if you let them go to seed. They're prolific seed producers, so expect to have an increase in weed pressure the following year. If you don't keep those under control, then you allow those weeds to set seeds. Some of the other ones that come to mind would be like the Italian ryegrass. Doesn't grow very, very tall, but can be very problematic, especially up north. There's been cases where it's developed resistance to 5 different herbicide mode of actions, especially to some of the ones that we normally use in a lot of conventional vineyards, like the glyphosate, the glufosinate, the paraquat, and some of the selective grass herbicides we use in some of these vineyards. But as far as other competitive weeds, I mean those would be the first ones that come to mind. It's not easy to control them, even with mechanical cultivation, mainly because they're perennial weeds, so they produce asexually, and once we start tilling them, we can potentially move some of that plant material to different areas, and they can potentially spread. So it's not a very quite easy question to answer on how to manage those, without using any types of synthetic herbicides. Best approach is to try to knock them down before they set seeds, and try to prevent any way to try to reduce the spread of some of those weeds.
Great.
To just to piggyback on Jorge's comment, and just I think an interesting thing for anyone out there, if they're willing to kind of look into it, typically when you see a species dominating in your system, it's telling you something. It's telling you something about your soil. It might be saying that you have excess sodium. It might tell you that you have excess nitrogen. It might tell you that you're bacterially dominant. Um, that that when it lacks diversity and you have a plant taking over, 9 times out of 10, there's an imbalance in your soil. There's an imbalance in that soil health, and their nature is it's really trying to tell you something. So it's a really fun exercise, and I guess it might turn a headache, something that has given you a headache for X amount of years, into this really fascinating and interesting problem you can try and solve. Sometimes this is a fertility issue. This is something where you may have been over applying some macronutrients for too long, and it might be a way of recognizing that you can kind of correct some programs, um, and that alone might deal with the dominance of some of these species. I mean, it's so we're humans, we like to see an issue and attack it. A lot of the time, we never ask ourselves, why is it there in the first place? Uh, this is kind of a lot of that, this regenerative mindset of why is that pest there? Rather than like, oh my God, that pest there, let's kill it. You just take a step back, and I'm not saying you don't go after it, you don't not deal with it, but what I'm suggesting is trying to understand, um, why is it there in the first place? Why is this one plant dominating? In the case of mare's tail, that plant is an incredible miner of silica. Um, it metabolizes silica, and then when it breaks down, if you mow it and it breaks down, the microbiology then can consume it and turn it into a usable form for the plant to use. So it's just this it's a really fun exercise of maybe taking something that has really bothered you for a long time, and you never know, you might recognize or find out that this is actually an asset. This is something in your vineyard that you might want to have, and you don't want to eradicate it. Never do you want one species dominating. The diverse piece is the crucial one. But anyway, just a fun thought exercise for anybody that's interested in kind of going down that route.
Yeah, thanks, Jordy. It's yeah, really important to take the full context of the ecology of your site and into consideration when making these huge decisions, for sure. Yeah, we had a question for George. What if your vine row is dominated by yellow nut sedge? What can you see being the issue from what Jordan said? Oh, I guess it's kind of for both of you.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'd say yellow nut sedge is more of a problem in earlier vines when you begin to plant them, because you really don't want any weed competition with those younger vines. In a more mature vineyard, I mean, it's more tolerable, just because it doesn't grow very big. But I mean, I would suggest trying to do your best to try to control yellow nut sedge earlier on. It does tend to spread out almost like a carpet, so it will suppress a lot of the other weeds. But I'd say earlier on, I try to manage as much as you can, especially just because I mean we were also talking about vertebrate pests being an issue, especially in those earlier year vines. And so you really want to minimize the weed population earlier on in comparison, at least to mature orchards. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Uh, I think, and just to add to that, sorry, Jorge, but like nut sedge, from what I understand, is an indicator species, and typically it's telling you that your soils are pretty compacted.
Hmm.
Um, they're gonna thrive in compacted, wet ground soils. So there may be a different approach here of like maybe we should pull some shanks through and work on compaction. And in doing that, you may deal with the nuts edge in the meantime.
Yeah, make it
Yeah.
a less appealing situation for them. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, George.
No, I completely agree with that. I think making the conditions, changing the growing conditions and trying to suppress, something like yellow nut sedge, I think that's a very interesting approach.
Great. We had a question about nematodes. I'm gonna kind of table that one because it's not really the focus of this one. I do have some resources if you want to reach out sidebar. But I do, before we kind of get into our kind of closing conversation, there was a question about bioherbicides. I'm just wondering if any of you have experience with those, some of the new products on the market, or even organic herbicides, or just how to incorporate that into a non-synthetic management plan, because obviously you can't just swap jugs for an organic or even a bioherbicide, but have you worked those into any of your programs?
I have not.
I haven't. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
okay, cool. Yeah, from people I've talked to, organic herbicides in particular, they can, on a really wet year, they can gain you like 2 weeks to be able to not let the weeds get out of control before you can get equipment in, like it's kind of like a buffer, but obviously not replacing synthetic herbicide. I've heard some of the new bioherbicides on the market are a little more effective, but I haven't seen them in person. So I think we'll just kind of leave that as
Yeah.
unfortunately the
I've had
tradition.
with those organic herbicides, if you're going to use them, you wait till it is as hot as can be outside.
Hot and
And
sunny, yeah.
and then I'll put like a nice strong surfactant on there, like an Oro Boost. Um, but I'll wait like the hottest day of the year. You see it hit, plus 95 degrees, and that's when you'll get that good burn down. They are not effective early season at all. It's a waste of money in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of been my experience with those herbicides as well. They're straight contact herbicides. They don't work really well. You got to use them at high carrier volumes on a very hot day, and you got to really use them with some sort of strong adjuvant to make them stick. But that's
Mm-hmm.
that's that's been my experience with them. So you need to do several passes sometimes in order for to get them to work properly, get a good burn down. But yeah, that's been my experience with evaluating some of those herbicides.
Great. Well, I'd love to hear some lessons that you've learned, and you guys also mentioned some failures, and as humans, that's often how we learn best. So, do you have any, bits of wisdom to share with the crowd, or things to avoid, or, a good story about something that really went wrong that nobody else should do? Will, you want to kick us off? Just, we haven't heard from you in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier when we had all these spring rains and ended up with some taller cover crops, and we went through there and mowed them first before we did our under the vine cultivation. And we threw, the biomass was 3, in some cases 4 feet tall. We threw all that. My particular mower, I have a Campo or Chris Grow mowers, and they throw the grass towards the berm. And then when we run those tools through there, all they did was plug up and drag it all to the end, and didn't work at all, and made giant messes at the end of the vineyard. So, we would preferably go through and do the undervine cultivation first, 1 or 2 passes, and then mow the cover crops. Or we're talking with Jordan and seeing what they're doing. Maybe we're going to start crimping those cover crops and not even mowing them. So that's going to be probably our plan in the future, is to try to either, whether we end up buying a crimper or using a ring roller like Jordan did. But definitely keep that in mind. A lot of people's mowers don't throw that trash or the clippings, the mulch onto the berm. So if your mower doesn't do that, it's probably not an issue. But for us, we went through and mowed 200 acres before we decided that that was the wrong thing to do. So in order to fix that problem, we had to go through and do another pass with a sweeper, sweep all of that stuff that we just threw onto the berm thinking we were doing the right thing, we had to go sweep it all back to the middle and then run our undervine cultivation tools. So maybe crimping or the ring roller behind maybe is a better approach. So that was one thing that we learned, and yeah, it was costly and made big messes at the end that we had to deal with. So definitely keep that in mind.
I got one. So if you're at a vineyard, this is probably very different for orchard or tree growers, and you're thinking about using sheep as weed control, go buy an implement. Those animals right there, if you're looking to control weeds, which would mean you're trying to eat down ground cover, which means those animals are going to be in that block a long time. You are walking a fine line to some serious compaction issues. I don't think sheep should be used as weed control unless you have the ability to graze during the growing season where soils have dried out. Yeah, don't go down that road because it can set you back many years. Sheep and livestock in vineyards are for biology. It's a costly pass, and they are there for soil health. They are not there to control weeds. They shouldn't be. I have just about killed a couple acres with leaving animals in a vineyard for 2 or 3 days too long. I made every mistake in the book with running sheep in vineyards, and they can be an incredibly powerful tool if used well, but not for weed control, not in a vineyard. Again, if you're in one of those high wire machine picked systems, epic. They're going to go through, they're going to do that first pass for you. Soils will have dried out enough to where they're not going to create a ton of compaction. They're going to sucker for you. They're going to save you a mowing pass, a suckering pass. They're going to add some fertility to the ground. It won't be a huge biology addition at that point in the year. But if you're on a traditional VSP and you got vines that they could hit during bud break, don't do it. Just don't go down that road. They're there for biology. They shouldn't be in a block for more than 24 hours. If anything, I would judge successful grazing passes if I had to mow 2 or 3 times more that year.
Great. George, have you seen any kind of things to learn from or anything to take away for the group?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're gonna transition over to not using any sort of synthetic herbicides, I think you got to get yourself the right equipment. I think where I've seen it fail many times is people don't have the right equipment to do it. Sometimes they have a high expectation that they're gonna be able to have a vineyard as clean as when you're using, synthetic herbicides. But I think whenever you're transitioning to a more sustainable or this type of approach, I think you have to be more comfortable with more weeds present in the vineyard. You got to have the right equipment to be successful at it. I think those are the two of the main things that I've discussed with people that are transitioning to not using herbicides. I think people have to be more comfortable with weeds in the vineyard and try to keep as much of the tougher ones to control, trying to keep that weed population down, I guess, a bit more.
Definitely. Yeah, and I've talked to some growers that make that transition, and they usually talk about the 1 to 2 year kind of grace period where if you've been using pre-emergence for so long, you've got, some time to kind of dial in those tools over a couple of years before you really get the full
No
weed
doubt.
pressure. And that's a great
Yeah.
time to start working on your implements, make sure your tractor operators are fully trained and everything's dialed in. So that's a great advice. Um, okay, do we have any more questions? We've got one
Yeah.
specific one. Can you use a Clemens on young vines with grow tubes?
I would say, yeah, you could. You just have to be diligent and make sure it's set up right. It is going to knock some of the tubes over if they're not tied, if they weren't tied properly. And you have to make sure that you leave enough space from the trip arm and the blade so that it doesn't cut the vine, because it will cut the vine. Those vines are small and it'll cut them just like a weed if you're not careful. So the operator or the manager, whoever's setting it up, needs to set it up maybe not as close as they would on an old vineyard or a more established vineyard. Because yeah, if you don't pay attention to it, you could send your operator through there and in no time flat, you could have half your vineyard dead.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
no doubt. And then like really observe afterwards, even if it did make a good pass, you want to make sure a lot of that soil didn't make it up under the carton. Like being careful of the scion rooting, I guess, is something
yeah,
to watch there for sure.
That makes sense.
and to be
And
mindful
do
when
you
you're,
guys use rebar stakes?
yeah, we use rebar or pencil rod.
Okay.
And also to be
Yeah.
mindful when your planting crew, when they're planting, they need to make sure it's close enough to that rebar and planted in a proper position within the vine row, not to the side, not 3 inches away. It needs to be planted properly. The one other thing we do is at our drip hose, at our risers, we put a stake or a piece of rebar.
Oh, yeah.
Because that trip arm, if there's nothing there to catch that trip arm, it'll bust the tees on those risers. So we actually, the new vineyards that we establish now going this way, at every riser, there is either a half of a T-post or a pencil rod to help trip the mechanism so it doesn't bust either cut the hose or break the T.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, any more kind of closing thoughts or nuggets of wisdom from the panel here? Okay. Well, it's 1:59, guys. We really nailed it.
You guys sure did. Thank you for the great discussion, you guys. And you even got some shout outs in the chat as well, saying great job. Before we sign off, I just wanted to let you guys know that we have a resource library on our CSWA website that has a ton of great sustainable weed management resources, tons of like user guides, educational videos, templates. So you could go on there and search by topic or search by the resource specifically. And we definitely recommend checking that out. And if you'd like to get involved, you could sign up for our CSWA newsletter, participate in one of our numerous educational workshops that you can find on our events page on our website, or you could even become a sustainable wine growing ambassador by taking the Sustainable Wine Growing Ambassador course. And you can find that on our website as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you to all the participants, and then thank you to our amazing speakers as well. Appreciate your guys' time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Roy.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you guys. Sorry about all
have
the troubles.
No worries. I'll follow up with everybody that registered with the recording as well as these slides. All right, thanks. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
You as
Thank
well.
you. Take care.